Did you know that 85% of research gets wasted because the wrong study design was chosen? When this happens, the findings often lose their value, failing to make an impact or reach a wider audience. A poor study design can seriously hurt your chances of getting published in a top-tier journal. But it's more than just getting published. Choosing the wrong design can have real-world consequences. Take Andrew Wakefield's infamous 1998 study, for example. It falsely claimed a link between MMR vaccine and autism, all based on a weak design that couldn't prove causality. In this video, I will walk you through 7 simple steps to help you choose the perfect study design for your research problem every time. Step 1. Identify the type of data needed. The first step in choosing the right study design is figuring out what kind of data you need. This decision usually starts with your research question. Do you need qualitative data, quantitative data, or a mixture of both? Qualitative data is non-numerical and captures qualities or characteristics like people's attitudes or experiences. Quantitative data, on the other hand, is all about numbers, measuring things like quantities or amounts. To decide which type of data you need, ask yourself, is your research aiming to explore a situation or explain it? Exploratory research is great when there is limited knowledge about the topic. It's about generating hypotheses, discovering patterns, or identifying important variables. This type of research is open-ended and flexible, allowing you to explore a wide range of possibilities. For example, if you want to understand what factors influence job satisfaction among healthcare workers in rural areas, you might consider both numeric factors like age and salary and non-numeric factors like attitude or work environment. For this, an exploratory design like a cross-sectional study or a phenomenological study could be ideal. On the flip side, explanatory research focuses on testing hypotheses that come from theory or previous research. The goal here is to establish cause and effect relationships or determine how strong certain associations are. For instance, you're trying to figure out whether performance-based incentives improve job satisfaction among healthcare workers in rural areas. You will need a study design like an RCT or a cohort study to test this hypothesis while controlling for other variables that might affect job satisfaction. Step 2. Consider how well researched the study topic is. When you're picking a study design, it's crucial to consider how much research has already been done on your topic. This usually starts with a thorough literature review, digging into what's already known and identifying where the gaps are. The amount of existing research can guide your choice of study design in several important ways. If your topic has been studied extensively, your research might focus on testing a specific hypothesis, comparing different interventions, or refining existing theories. You might even do a secondary analysis of previous studies to build on the evidence. For these kinds of questions, you'd likely want a more structured and rigorous design like a randomized control trial, a cohort study, or even a systematic review. On the other hand, if your topic is relatively new or hasn't been explored much, your research might aim to generate new hypotheses or explore areas that haven't been fully studied. For these situations, exploratory designs like qualitative studies, case studies, cross-sectional studies might be most suitable. When you're picking a study design, you can't ignore the practical stuff, like how much time you've got, what kind of resources you're working with, and any other limitations you might face, like needing specific experts or even equipment. Let's imagine you got a deadline breathing down your neck, whether it's from a funding agency, your university, or some other stakeholder. This will definitely influence your choice of study design. If you're short on time, a cross-sectional study which gives you a snapshot data at one point in time might be your best bet. On the flip side, a longitudinal study which tracks participants over a longer period would be ideal if you had all the time in the world. So if you're in a rush, go for something like a cross-sectional study or a retrospective study design. Now let's talk money. The financial resources you have can make or break your study decision. Some designs like randomized controlled trials or longitudinal studies are seriously resource hungry. They require a lot of funding for recruitment, data collection, follow-ups, and analysis. But if you're working on a tighter budget, no worries, there are still solid options like secondary data analysis and retrospective studies that won't drain your wallet. Step 4. Consider the availability of the study population. Let's talk about the people you are studying, your study population. The availability or how easy it is to reach them can really influence your choice of the study design. Let's say your target group is hard to access. Maybe they are marginalized, they live in remote areas, or are part of an outlawed group. In these cases, it might be tricky to use study designs that require following up participants over time or gathering data from larger groups like cohort studies or RCTs. Instead, you might lean towards something more manageable like a cross-sectional study where you gather data at one point in time, or a qualitative study which lets you dive deep without needing a huge sample size. And then there's the issue of how you actually get these people into your study. If you have to use methods like consecutive sampling or snowball sampling to reach them, it might weaken the strength of more complex study designs. So sometimes you have to be flexible and choose a design that fits within the reality of who you can actually study rather than the ideal scenario. Step 5. Consider the size of the sampling frame. Alright, let's dive into something really important. The size of your study population. This can have a big impact on what kind of study design you choose. If you're working with a small population, you need to think carefully about how to get the most out of that limited group. For instance, if you only have a small number of participants available, designs that work well for small sample sizes like qualitative studies, case-based study designs could be your best bet. Imagine you're doing a study to assess the quality of emergency care across hospitals in a district, and there are only 4 hospitals to work with. In this case, a case series design might be the way to go. You treat each hospital as its own case, gathering detailed data on things like staffing, equipment, patient outcomes, and processes. Alternatively, you could opt for a qualitative approach, conducting in-depth interviews with key personnel in each hospital to understand the situation from their perspective. So when your sampling frame is on the smaller side, it's all about choosing a design that allows you to dig deep and get meaningful insights, even if you don't have a large population to work with. Step 6. Consider the anticipated prevalence or incidence of the main study outcome or exposure. How common or rare the outcome or exposure you're studying is plays a key role in picking the right study design. This can make a big difference in how you approach your research. If the outcome you're looking at is common, that is great news in a way. It means you're more likely to find enough participants who have that condition, whether you're doing a follow-up study or just taking a snapshot in time. This makes designs like cohort studies or cross-sectional studies pretty practical. But what if you're dealing with a rare outcome? That's when things get a little tricky. In a prospective cohort study, for example, you'd need a huge sample size to find enough cases, and that's not always feasible. That's why in these situations, case control study is often the better choice. It's more efficient when you're dealing with rare outcomes. Now, when it comes to exposures, if the exposure is common, a case control study can still work well. You don't need a ton of participants to explore the link between the exposure and the outcome. But if you're dealing with a rare exposure like radiation, a cohort study might be your best bet. You can follow participants over time to see how the exposure affects their health. So depending on how common or rare your outcome or exposure is, you'll want to choose the study design that best fits the situation, ensuring your research is both practical and effective. And finally, step 7. Consider the strength, weakness, and ethical issues of each design. When you're picking a study design, it's not just about finding the one that fits your research question. It's also about considering the strengths, weaknesses, and ethical issues tied to each option. Some study designs are fantastic at controlling for confounding variables and bias, which means they give you really strong cause and effect relationships. This is what we call high internal validity. On the flip side, some designs shine when it comes to external validity, meaning their results can be generalized to broader populations or different settings. But no design is perfect. Some designs are more vulnerable to things like selection bias, recall bias, or measurement bias, which can throw off your results. Then there is the ethical side of things. For example, randomized controlled trials often need rigorous ethical approval because of the potential risks to participants. But other designs like retrospective studies or systematic reviews might require less intensive ethical scrutiny or sometimes none at all. So, before you settle on a study design, make sure you're not just thinking about how well it will work for your research question, but also how it stands up in terms of its strengths and weaknesses and ethical considerations. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification button for more videos like this.